There's a time in every man's life when he starts a podcast. I'm 35 years old, and I'm a white guy, have a beard, have a sourdough starter. Really, this was inevitable. As far as what I'm going to make this podcast about, well, the running joke I have with my parents whenever I talk to them is that I relate everything back to video games. I think that's important. Because what the world really needs is another 35-year-old white guy talking about video games. Well, hopefully I can have a slightly more interesting take. I'm not really kind of the guy who just plays a lot of video games and has really great uh, takes or relates it back to their English degree, or I don't know, has a more worldly view and finds some sort of poetic words to put that together with. Um, my sort of view on things is mostly informed by my earliest work. When I started my career, did a lot of quality assurance testing for some of the large video game companies. I won't say which. They have NDAs, and they always like to keep that wrapped up. I never really know why, but hey, I'll give them the courtesy because those jobs were fun, and I'd love to get back in there. And I don't want to don't want to make it more difficult for them. Um, but as I moved away from that, because the pay was better, I found uh, that I also wanted to sort of do more like game jams and things like that. So like a game jam is basically, hey, you have a set period of time, make a game, um, and if you can complete that, you're officially better than all the other professionals who do this for a living and get paid money for it because you actually hit your target, and they seem to always slip their deadlines. Um, as far as sort of how I got into that and why, it's when I went to school specifically, to learn how to make video games, and I don't think I've ever been professionally, truly paid to make a video game, which is sort of a funny thing. But whether or not you would say my degree was a waste, I think is sort of irrelevant because it really gave me sort of the way that I choose to express myself, which is by making video games or game jams specifically. And you know, when it comes down to like most other forms of media and like making stuff, you sort of like tell people things, or you show people things, or you kind of have like a message and like something you're really getting to them. But you know, with a video game, it's more like you're asking questions and you're letting players, as they sort of take in your video game, they sort of have to find their own answers. Sometimes there's only one answer. Like if it's a puzzle game, you really kind of got to do it the right way, um, and then you'll get through the puzzle. But if it's something a little bit more open, um, or maybe it's a puzzle game where you tried a bunch of incorrect combinations, and so you manipulate the state of the board to something different than when it started, and then you suddenly have that revelation of how to fix it from where you are at. You kind of found your own way there. So um, and then of course there's games that are really really set on sort of you making your own path, and they have the ending slides about what happened after you were gone, or they have the different outcomes to different quests or companions, things like that. Like little NPCs running around doing stuff. So I guess when it comes back down to like the asking of questions, I feel like that's sort of what I like to do. I like to, instead of it's been said a video game is a series of interesting decisions, and I sort of start at, well, what are some interesting questions I can ask? And sometimes the questions are no more no more complicated than, hey, can you go here? Can you do this thing? Can you defeat this boss? But sometimes you can get a little bit more out of that. You can ask questions like, you know, if you had to do this thing and there are three different ways you could do it, which one would you choose? Um, and there's also sort of this also element in play where sometimes you're asking the player like directly, like to them, like personally, right? Like how would you do this? And sometimes there's this kind of bit about like, well, okay, like this is a game about vampires. How would this like vampire character that you're playing, how would they do it? And that can be sort of fun and interesting, and especially it becomes more like collaborative sort of storytelling, sort of interactive experience because you have this one person who's like, well, I have this idea of like what I want this thing to be, and then their sort of idea is coming up against your questions as a designer, and you're sort of putting something together. Um, Now I will say this as a guy who does game jams, which are normally like I try to take ones that are a little bit longer, so they're normally like a month to 6 months long. Keep in mind your average game now takes years to make, so we're working at a much more condensed scale. I feel like the questions I've been asking in my games have been a lot smaller, so maybe getting a little bit too close to the like how would you do this or how would you get there, but you know I think as I've been working in the last like couple of years, I've been trying to push it a little bit further. So I guess sort of the way I'll end this off, because I've already been going on for almost 7 minutes now, is like what when you're making a game, when you're playing a game, what sort of questions are being asked of you, and do you want do you like those questions? Do you want more of those questions? Probably the most important question of all of this, the question about questions, if you will, is what questions are people not asking? Because those are probably the ones that need to get asked the most. Uh, I should probably have a way to end this, but I don't really got one. So you just make something up yourself. I'm sure you're creative. You'll get something good.